Before we begin, you don't need to do anything, not right now, not tonight, not for the next few minutes. There is nothing you need to fix, nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to carry a little longer, because here, in this space, you are not required to be strong. You are not required to be productive. You are not required to hold everything together. And if today felt heavy, if your thoughts have been loud, if your body feels tired in a way sleep alone hasn't been able to fix, then this moment is not asking you to try harder. It is asking you to let go, just for now, just for this breath, just for this moment. Let's slow everything down. So before we go anywhere, let's slow everything down. Not forcefully, not with effort, but gently. As if your whole nervous system is finally being given permission to exhale. Take a slow breath in through your nose, not to change anything, but just to notice that you are here. And now, a long, soft exhale, as if the weight you've been carrying does not need to be carried into this next moment. Good. Again. Inhale slowly, feeling your chest rise only as much as it wants to, and exhale, even slower, like the day is finally loosening its grip on you. There is nowhere you need to rush to, nothing waiting that needs your attention right now, just this breath arriving and leaving on its own. Moving as you continue breathing. As you continue breathing, not loud, just a quiet softening somewhere inside you, maybe in your forehead, maybe behind your eyes, maybe in your jaw that has been holding more than it needed to today. And you don't have to change it, just notice it. Because even noticing is already a form of release. For still active, still active, still active. Still thin cloud darts, you don't need to control them immediately, fading inside your thoughts. Your awareness is already calmer. You are the awareness known as, just to feel it. Notice where you are being supported right now, the surface beneath you, holding you without asking for anything in return. The weight of your body being received fully, without resistance, without judgment. And you may realize something simple here. You don't have to hold yourself up right now. The surface is already doing that for you. So you can allow the shoulders to drop just a little, not all at once, just enough to feel the difference. And the jaw to soften slightly, as if the need to hold tension there is no longer necessary. Even the space between your eyebrows can begin to widen, just a little. As if your face is remembering what ease feels like. And now, if it feels comfortable, you can imagine something gentle, not visualizing perfectly, just sensing. Imagine that every breath you take is slowly becoming lighter than the last, and every exhale is releasing something you didn't even realize you were still holding, not memories, not problems, just the weight of carrying too much for too long. For somewhere deep inside. You may begin to understand something quietly powerful. You were never meant to hold everything at once. Not all the thoughts, not all the responsibilities, not all the emotional weight of the day. You were meant to move through life and then return to rest, just like everything in nature does. The sun sets, the ocean stills, the wind softens, and nothing in nature feels guilty for slowing down. So tonight, to that same rhythm, to slow out, permission from anyone else, to rest without earning it. Stay with this feeling, slightly deeper, slightly more effortless, as if your body is remembering something ancient. That rest is not something you achieve, it is something you allow, as something you unaware in your mind. And for a moment, in your mind to yesterday, not into planning or solving or analyzing, just here, just now, just this soft space between breaths where nothing is required of you. Spation. If you notice any tension, fine safeguard. Somebody stopped asking it to stay, And you might be you. It might begin from outside, but from within. A gentle inner voice that says, you don't have to hold it all anymore. You can put it down now. You can rest now. And as those whirl anymore, let in. Like softening the edges of your awareness and dissolving into stillness. Kachin dissolving the mat, returning to rest, simply without control, without effort, just allowing each inhale to arrive and each exhale to leave a little more space inside you, space to rest, space to soften, space to let go. And in a few moments, we will begin the deeper journey, the slow unwinding of the mind, the gentle release of the body, the quiet return to sleep. But for now, you don't need to go anywhere yet. Just stay here in this soft beginning where nothing is required of you and everything is already okay. Right now, in this very moment, there is nothing you need to fix, nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to figure out, nothing you need to improve or change before you can finally allow yourself to rest. And even if your mind doesn't fully believe that yet, you don't need to argue with it. You don't need to convince it. You don't need to push it away. You can simply allow these words to exist alongside whatever you are feeling right now, because this moment does not require your perfection. It does not require your effort. It does not require you to be anything other than exactly what you already are, just here, just now, just breathing, just existing. And if you truly allow yourself to pause for a moment, you may begin to notice something very subtle happening underneath everything else, a soft invitation, not loud, not demanding, not urgent, just a quiet suggestion that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to hold everything together right now, not all at once, not in this moment, because there is a difference between the life you are living and the weight you are carrying inside it. And right now, you are being invited to gently set that weight down, not forever, not permanently, just for now, just for this moment, just for this breath. And as you begin to consider that, you don't have to force anything to happen. You don't have to relax properly. You don't have to do relaxation the right way, because even trying too hard is still effort. And tonight, you are allowed to step out of effort and into ease. So instead of doing anything, you can simply begin noticing how you are sitting or lying or resting right now. Not trying to change it, just becoming aware of it, the surface beneath you, quietly supporting you without asking for anything in return. That support has been there the entire time. Even when you were busy, even when you were thinking, even when you were trying to manage everything in your mind, it never left. And for a moment now, you can allow yourself to feel that support more clearly, not as an idea, but as an experience. The gentle pressure of your body being held, the quiet stability beneath you, the simple fact that you do not need to hold yourself up alone right now. And as that realization slowly settles in, you might begin to notice your breathing on its own, not controlled, not adjusted, just happening naturally, in and out, like waves arriving and waves leaving, without instruction, and you don't need to change it. You can simply allow it to continue, because your breath has always known what to do, even when your mind feels uncertain. And as you stay with that gentle rhythm, you may notice something else beginning to shift, a soft loosening, maybe in your forehead where so many thoughts tend to gather. You don't have to force it to relax, just allowing the possibility that it can, and even that is enough. And as your awareness gently moves downward, you might notice your eyes feeling slightly heavier, not because you are trying to sleep, but because they are finally being allowed to stop scanning, stop watching, stop holding attention so tightly. And that heaviness is not something to resist, it is something to welcome, because it is the beginning of letting go. And as your face begins to soften, you may notice your jaw as well, that place that often holds silent tension, words unspoken, thoughts unprocessed, pressure carried without noticing. And now you don't need to release it perfectly, just allowing a little space there, a small softening. Even a 1% release is enough, because your nervous system does not require perfection to begin calming down. It only requires permission, and you are beginning to give it that permission now, without forcing it, without trying to achieve anything, just a quiet inner message. It's okay, you don't have to hold so tightly anymore. And as that message settles deeper, your attention may begin to drift further down into your neck and shoulders, a place that often carries more than it should. Responsibility, pressure, expectations, unspoken weight from the day. And again, you don't need to remove anything all at once. Just noticing, just allowing. And if even a small part of that weight begins to feel slightly less intense, you are already moving in the direction of rest. Because relaxation is not a sudden event, it is a gradual remembering, a slow return, a soft undoing. And as your shoulders begin to respond in their own natural way, you might sense a gentle sinking sensation, not falling, not collapsing, just lowering, like something inside you finally understands. There is nothing I need to carry right now. And that understanding does not come from thinking. It comes from allowing, so you don't need to analyze it. You don't need to explain it. You only need to let it be here. And as you continue to rest in this awareness, you may begin to feel your body becoming slightly heavier. Not uncomfortable, not stuck, but supported, held, grounded, as if gravity itself is not pulling you down, but gently inviting you to rest. And in that subtle shift, you might begin to realize something quietly important. You are not in a place where you need to prepare for anything. Right now, there is nothing coming that requires your immediate attention, nothing that needs you to solve it in this exact moment, and that creates space in your mind, space in your body, space in your awareness, and in that space, something very soft begins to emerge, stillness, not forced stillness, not empty silence, but natural stillness, the kind that arrives when nothing is being demanded from you. And as you begin to sense that stillness forming, you don't need to hold on to it. You don't need to maintain it. You simply notice it, like noticing a calm sky after a long day of wind. And it is in this gentle noticing that your system begins to slow even more. Breathing becomes softer, thoughts become quieter, the sense of doing begins to fade, and what remains is simply being. And in this being, you are safe to continue resting, safe to continue softening, safe to continue letting go, without needing to go anywhere else in your mind, because from here, we naturally begin to move deeper into the next layer of letting go, as you continue from that place of soft awareness. And now, there is nothing out, only a gentle continuation of what is already beginning to happen naturally within you, because your body, your breath, your nervous system already knows how to return to calm. It has been doing it your entire life. Every time you slept, every time you rested without effort, every time you let go without even thinking about it. So now, you are not learning something new. You are simply remembering, And in this remembering, there is no pressure, there is no task, there is no expectation, only a gentle invitation to stop guiding your breath so tightly, instead to allow it to guide itself. Because if you notice carefully, your breath has never actually needed control. It has continued even when you were not paying attention. It has supported you quietly, moment after moment, day after day, year after year, without asking anything in return. And as you begin to sense that now, you may notice something subtle happening, a soft shift from effort into allowance, from doing into receiving, from controlling into trusting. And you don't need to force that shift. It happens on its own as soon as you stop interfering with it. So you can simply allow your attention to rest gently on your breathing, not to change it, not to fix it, not to deepen it, just to notice it in its natural rhythm, in its natural flow, in its natural intelligence. And as you stay with that, you may begin to realize something quietly profound, that your breath is already slower than it was a few moments ago. Not because you tried to slow it down, but because your system is responding to safety, and safety is what allows everything inside you to soften. So there is nothing you need to do here, only notice and allow. And as each breath continues, you may start to feel that the space between each inhale and each exhale is becoming slightly longer, not forced, not exaggerated, just naturally expanding, like a gentle tide pulling back from the shore, creating more space for stillness to exist. And in that space, your body begins to understand something important, that it does not need to stay alert anymore. It does not need to stay prepared. It does not need to remain slightly tense just in case. Because nothing is being asked of you right now. Nothing is arriving that requires reaction. And so the body begins to respond in its own quiet way. The shoulders may soften a fraction more. The jaw may release another layer. The chest may feel slightly less guarded, not all at once, but in small, almost unnoticeable waves. And you don't need to track those changes, because they are happening underneath awareness. And that is exactly where deep relaxation begins, not in the thinking mind, but in the automatic intelligence of your body. And as you continue breathing in this softer rhythm, you might begin to notice that your thoughts are still there, but they are no longer pulling you as strongly. They are becoming less important, less urgent, less loud, like distant echoes that no longer require a response. And you are not pushing them away. You are simply no longer feeding them with attention, and without attention, they naturally begin to fade, just like waves lose strength when they move away from the shore. And in that fading, a quiet clarity begins to appear. Not a thinking clarity, a feeling clarity, a sense of space inside your awareness where everything feels slightly more open, slightly more distant, slightly more calm. And it is in this openness that your body begins to settle even deeper, because the nervous system follows attention, and right now your attention is becoming softer, wider, slower. And so your entire system begins to mirror that same softness. And as you stay with this rhythm, you may begin to feel your breath moving more like a background sensation now. Something happening on its own, without effort, without instruction, like the natural rhythm of the ocean continuing whether you are watching it or not. And you don't need to guide it, you don't need to shape it, you don't need to correct it. Because your breath is not a task, it is a bridge between tension and ease, between alertness and rest, between holding on and letting go. And right now, you are gently walking across that bridge without even needing to move. And as that awareness deepens, you may begin to notice your body feeling slightly heavier again, not in a restrictive way, but in a grounding way. as if gravity itself is becoming more gentle, more supportive, more welcoming, and that heaviness is not something to resist, it is something to allow, because heaviness, in this context, is simply the body entering safety, and safety is the doorway to rest, so you can continue breathing without needing to adjust anything, and simply let each breath arrive on its own and leave on its own, like a soft, natural cycle that has always known how to continue without effort. And somewhere within this rhythm, you may begin to sense a deeper quiet forming underneath everything else, a quiet that is not created, but revealed, because it was always there beneath the noise. And now that things are slowing down, you are beginning to notice it again. And this quiet does not ask anything from you. It does not require understanding. It only invites you to rest within it, to rest alongside it, to rest into it. And as you allow that, you may notice something very subtle happening in your awareness. A slight drifting, a soft inward pull, not towards sleep yet, but toward the edge of sleep. That place where thinking becomes unnecessary and simply being becomes enough. And there is nothing you need to hold on to here, nothing you need to complete, nothing you need to achieve, because in this space you are already exactly where you need to be, beginning to soften, beginning to slow, beginning to release, and naturally beginning to continue deeper into the next layer of letting go, ashafsesi. And now, as nothing you need to search for, nothing you need to analyze, nothing you need to change about yourself in order for this moment to work, because this is not something you are doing. This is something that is already happening, as long as you allow it, and so gently now, without effort, without pressure, you can begin to notice the space at the very top of your awareness, the space around your forehead and around your eyes. And you may not have realized it before, but this is often where the mind holds its quietest tension, not always obvious tension, not always painful tension, but subtle holding, a kind of invisible readiness, a soft alertness that says, stay aware, stay prepared, don't fully let go yet. And you don't need to fight that, you don't need to correct it, you only need to notice it, because noticing is already the beginning of release, and as you allow your attention to rest there, something very gentle begins to happen on its own, not forced, not instructed, just unfolding naturally, like mist slowly thinning in the morning air, a soft easing, a soft widening, a soft loosening, and you might begin to feel it first as a subtle change, not a dramatic one, just a slight sense that the muscles around your eyes no longer need to hold themselves so tightly, as if they are being given permission to stop scanning, to stop focusing, to stop maintaining effort. And that permission does not come from outside of you. It comes from within you as you continue to rest here. And as that softening begins, you don't need to try to deepen it, because your body knows how to continue it on its own. So you can simply observe and allow. And as you stay with that gentle awareness, you may notice that the area between your eyebrows, that subtle space often associated with thinking and focus, is beginning to feel slightly less engaged, slightly more open, slightly more free, as if a quiet exhale is happening there, without you needing to breathe it out intentionally. And from there, that softness begins to travel, not quickly, not suddenly, but in a natural downward flow, like warmth slowly spreading through water, down from the forehead into the temples, and then gently around the eyes, softening the tiny muscles that hold expression, thought, attention. And you don't need to guide this process, you are simply witnessing it unfold. And as it unfolds, something very important is happening beneath the surface. Your nervous system is beginning to understand safety, not intellectual safety, but felt safety, the kind of safety that tells your body, you do not need to stay alert right now. You are allowed to soften, you are allowed to let go, and in response to that understanding, your system begins to change its rhythm, slightly slower, slightly quieter, slightly more inward. And you may notice that your breathing reflects this too, not because you changed it, but because it is naturally synchronizing with this softer state. And as you continue to rest here, the softness around your eyes begins to spread further, gently moving down into your cheeks, loosening the tiny expressions that are often held unconsciously throughout the day, expressions of concentration, concern, attention, responsibility. And now, none of those need to be active, not here, not now, and so they begin to release, not all at once, but gradually, like tension melting under warm light. And as that melting continues, your awareness may begin to feel slightly more spacious, as if your mind is no longer holding everything so tightly together. And that space, that quiet opening, is exactly what allows deeper relaxation to begin, because relaxation is not something you force, it is something that appears when effort is no longer necessary. And now, as this gentle release continues moving downward, you may begin to notice your jaw area next, a place that often holds so much without you realizing it. Subtle clenching, unspoken thoughts, quiet emotional weight, invisible pressure. And you don't need to fix any of that. You don't need to identify it. You don't need to label it. You only need to allow the possibility that it does not need to stay held right now. And in that permission, something soft begins to happen, a slight parting, a gentle loosening, a subtle letting go, not dramatic, just enough. And that is always enough, because your nervous system does not respond to intensity, it responds to safety, and safety is already beginning to grow within you. As you continue to follow this slow internal descent, and now, as that softness continues to spread, it begins to move further downward, into your neck, a place that often carries connection between mind and body, thought and feeling, responsibility and response, and as it softens, you may notice a slight feeling of relief beginning to form, as if something you didn't realize was heavy is no longer being held in the same way, and that relief does not require effort. It simply appears as holding begins to stop, and from the neck, this gentle release continues flowing into the shoulders, and here something even deeper begins to happen, because shoulders are often where life accumulates, daily pressure, unspoken expectations, quiet burdens, endless subtle responsibilities, and now, for just this moment, none of those need to be carried, and your body begins to respond to that truth, not immediately, not suddenly, but gradually, like a slow sinking, a soft lowering, a natural easing downward, as if something inside you is finally saying, "It is safe to rest now," and that message does not need to be repeated because your body understands it already, and so the shoulders begin to release their grip, not collapsing, not falling, just softening, like heavy fabric finally being placed down, and in that softness, your entire upper body begins to feel slightly lighter emotionally, even as it feels physically more supported, and this combination, lightness and support, is the exact state where deep rest begins to emerge, and you don't need to hold on to it, you only need to allow it to continue, as we gently begin to move deeper into the next layer of letting go, of that gently wetting to the next layer at Gastona, only an Boz, the softness that began around your eyes, and gently move through your forehead, and ease through your jaw, is not stopping here. It is continuing like a quiet wave, moving through layers of tension you did not even realize were still active, and you may begin to notice now that your face feels slightly different than it did a few moments ago, not dramatically different, just subtly lighter, as if the need to hold expression has become less important, as if your face is no longer preparing for anything, no longer reacting to anything, no longer managing anything, and in that absence of effort, a deeper relaxation begins to emerge, because your face, your jaw, your cheeks, your lips, they have all been part of a system that responds to the world all day long, smiling when needed, tensing when needed, focusing when needed, holding when needed, and now, for this moment, none of that is required, and so your system begins to recalibrate, slowly, naturally, without instruction, and you don't need to guide it, you only need to notice it, because noticing is enough, and as you stay with this gentle awareness, you may begin to feel the muscles around your mouth softening next, a quiet loosening at the corners of the lips, a subtle release in the lower face, as if the entire expression system is being allowed to rest, not forced into stillness, but invited into ease, and that invitation is already being accepted by your body. You might even sense a faint feeling of heaviness in the jaw now, not uncomfortable, but grounding, like the jaw is finally allowed to stop holding silent conversations, stop holding unspoken thoughts, stop holding the subtle pressure of the day, and as that release deepens, something even more subtle begins to happen, a shift in identity level holding, because the face is not just muscles, it is expression, it is presentation, it is the way the inner world meets the outer world. And right now, that meeting point is softening, becoming less guarded, less structured, less effortful, and in that softening, a deeper sense of ease begins to spread through your entire awareness. Not just physical ease, but emotional ease. As if something inside you is finally saying, you don't have to present anything right now. You don't have to hold a version of yourself together. You can simply be here without effort. And that realization does not need to be analyzed. It only needs to be felt. And as it is felt, your body responds again, because the body always follows permission. And so now, this softness begins to move downward from your face, gently flowing into your neck, a place that often holds connection between thinking and feeling, between internal pressure and external expression, and between what you carry and what you release, and you may begin to notice something subtle there now, a slight loosening, a slight easing, a slight dropping sensation, as if the neck is no longer required to keep everything aligned perfectly, and that alignment, that constant micro-adjustment to life, can finally pause, and in that pause, relief begins to emerge, not as a thought, but as a sensation, a quiet opening, a softening of effort, and as that relief grows, it naturally begins to flow into your shoulders. Here, something deeper begins to unfold, because shoulders are where so much invisible weight accumulates, not just physical tension, but emotional responsibility, mental tracking, unspoken obligations, subtle awareness of everything that must be managed, and right now, none of that needs to be held in the same way, not here, not in this moment, and your body begins to recognize that truth slowly at first, then more clearly, then more deeply, and you might notice your shoulders beginning to feel slightly heavier, but in a completely different way than before, not burdened, not strained, but supported, as if they are finally being allowed to rest into gravity instead of resisting it. And that shift, that surrender to support, is one of the deepest forms of relaxation your body can experience, because effort begins to dissolve, and in its place, stillness begins to form, not forced stillness, natural stillness, the kind that arrives when nothing is being demanded from you. And as that stillness grows, Your awareness may begin to feel slightly wider, softer, less focused on holding, and more open to simply being. And in that openness, your breath continues quietly on its own, not controlled, not shaped, just happening, like a gentle tide moving in and out without instruction, and you don't need to follow it, you don't need to deepen it, you don't need to change it, because your breath is already doing exactly what it needs to do. And now, as your shoulders soften further, that same release begins to move down into your upper arms, and something interesting begins to happen here. A sense of weightlessness mixed with grounding, as if your arms are no longer required to hold readiness, no longer preparing to act, no longer holding subtle tension for what might come next, and that readiness can finally relax, and as it relaxes, your arms begin to feel heavier, warmer, calmer, like they are being gently placed down into stillness, and that stillness continues flowing downward, toward your elbows, your forearms, your wrists, and finally into your hands, and your hands, so often used for doing, for holding, for interacting, for managing, are now being invited into something completely different. Not action, not control, but rest. And you may notice a subtle softening in your fingers now, a release of grip that you didn't even realize was still active. And in that release, something quiet opens inside you, a sense of not needing to hold on to anything right now, not physically, not mentally, not emotionally, just for this moment. You are allowed to let go. And as that truth settles deeper, your entire upper body begins to feel more unified, less separate parts, more one continuous field of ease. And in that field, your awareness begins to slow further as we gently continue moving deeper into the next layer of letting go. As you continue, and now, as you continue in this gentle unfolding, there is nothing you need to return to, nothing you need to check, nothing you need to fix about the way you are relaxing, because your body already knows how to continue this process on its own. You don't need to guide it anymore. You don't need to supervise it. You only need to allow it. And as that permission settles deeper within you, your awareness begins to drift naturally toward the area of your neck and shoulders again, not to analyze it, not to change it, just to notice it, because sometimes the simplest noticing is what allows the deepest release. And as you become gently aware of your neck, you may begin to realize something important, how much that area has been doing without your awareness, holding your head up all day, adjusting to every small shift in posture, responding to every moment of focus, stress, thought, or attention, quietly carrying more than it was ever meant to carry continuously, and yet it has done so without complaint until now, because now you are giving it something it rarely receives during the day: permission to stop, permission to soften, permission to let go. And you don't need to force that letting go, because forcing is just another form of effort, and effort is exactly what is dissolving here. So instead, you can simply notice what happens when nothing is required from it anymore, and you might begin to sense it first as a very subtle shift, a slight loosening at the base of the neck, a gentle easing behind the shoulders, a quiet softening that doesn't announce itself loudly, but simply begins to spread like warmth moving through still water. And as that softness begins to grow, something even more profound starts to happen underneath it. The sense of carrying begins to fade, not because the responsibilities of life disappear, but because for this moment you are no longer holding them. And that distinction is important, because release does not always mean removal. Sometimes it simply means putting something down for a while, and your body understands this instinctively. So now, the shoulders begin to respond. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, in layers, like a heavy coat being slowly unfastened, button by button, zipper by zipper, until it no longer needs to be worn in this moment, and you may notice a subtle downward shift, not falling, not collapsing, just settling, like something finally remembering it is allowed to rest, and in that settling, your entire upper body begins to feel more spacious, more open, less compressed, as if the space inside you has quietly expanded without effort, and that expansion is not something you create, it is something that appears when tension begins to dissolve, and as that dissolving continues, your awareness may begin to drift slightly lower now, down from the shoulders, into the upper back, and here too, there is often so much held without awareness. Posture, responsibility, emotional weight, mental alertness, subtle readiness for what might come next. And now, none of that needs to remain active. Not here, not now. And so the upper back begins to respond, slowly releasing its subtle grip, allowing itself to widen, allowing itself to soften, allowing itself to no longer maintain constant structure. And in that softening, you may notice a feeling that is difficult to describe with words, a feeling of support, without effort, as if your body is not being held up by you anymore, but by something much larger, much quieter, much more stable, and that realization alone can deepen relaxation even further, because effort is no longer necessary, and when effort is no longer necessary, the nervous system begins to shift into a completely different state, a slower state, a safer state, a quieter state, and you don't need to label it. You only need to allow it, and as that allowance continues, your breathing remains steady in the background, not controlled, not adjusted, just naturally continuing, like waves arriving and leaving a calm shore. And you may begin to notice that the space between breaths is slightly longer now, slightly softer, slightly more peaceful, and you don't need to deepen that either. It is already unfolding on its own, because your body is not separate from this process. It is the process. And now, as the shoulders continue to release, you might begin to feel a gentle warmth spreading through the upper arms, a sense of heaviness that is not discomfort, but surrender, as if the arms are no longer preparing for action, no longer holding readiness, no longer anticipating anything, and that readiness, that subtle tension of what next, can finally begin to fade, and as it fades, your arms begin to feel calmer, heavier, more supported, and that heaviness flows downward, slowly, gently, naturally, into the elbows, into the forearms, into the wrists, and finally into the hands, and your hands, which often carry the world in small, unconscious ways, begin to soften now, fingers loosening, grip releasing, effort dissolving, as if they are finally being allowed to stop doing, and simply be. And in that stillness, something deeper begins to emerge, a quiet internal message, not spoken in words, but felt in the body. You don't need to hold it all anymore. And that message does not require repetition, because your system is already responding to it. And as that response continues, your entire upper body begins to feel unified in relaxation, not separate parts anymore, but one continuous field of softening, and in that field, your awareness begins to slow even further, as we naturally continue into the next deeper layer of letting go, as this gentle wave of release, gentle wow, and now nothing need to remind, already knows exactly how to move deeper into rest on its own, and so you can simply allow it to continue, allow it to unfold naturally, without interruption, and as you stay with this soft awareness, you may begin to notice your arms again, not as something you need to control, not as something you need to position, but simply as something that is already being supported, already being held, already being allowed to rest, and something subtle begins to change, a quiet heaviness, not uncomfortable, not restrictive, but deeply comforting, like your arms are no longer required to stay ready for anything, no longer required to respond, no longer required to hold tension in preparation for action. And that readiness, that subtle background alertness, can begin to fade now, slowly, naturally, without force, and as it fades, your arms begin to feel different, as if gravity itself is no longer something pulling them down, but something gently welcoming them into rest. And that shift changes everything, because when gravity feels supportive instead of demanding, the body stops resisting it, and when resistance stops, relaxation begins. So now, your upper arms begin to soften. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in quiet layers, like warmth slowly spreading through still water. And as that warmth moves through them, you may begin to notice a sense of sinking, a soft internal drop, as if the arms are no longer being held in position by effort, but are finally being allowed to rest wherever they naturally want to be. And there is no need to adjust them, no need to check them, no need to correct anything, because this is not about doing, it is about allowing. And as that allowing deepens, you may begin to feel a gentle wave moving downward through the arms, from the upper arms into the elbows, softening the joints that often hold subtle unconscious tension, and from the elbows, that same wave continues flowing into the forearms, where so much unnoticed holding can accumulate throughout the day, typing, reaching, holding, reacting, doing. All of it begins to gently dissolve now, without effort, and you don't need to trace it. You don't need to analyze it. You only need to notice the possibility that it is already happening. And as that possibility is allowed, it becomes experience, and experience becomes sensation, and sensation becomes release, and that release continues moving downward into your wrists, and something very soft happens here, a loosening, a quiet unbinding, as if even the smallest muscles are being given permission to stop maintaining control, and from the wrists, that same softness flows into your hands, and your hands, so often used for holding on to life, for interacting with the world, for managing and controlling and engaging, are now being gently invited into something completely different, stillness, rest, non-doing, and you may begin to notice your fingers now, perhaps slightly heavier, perhaps slightly warmer, perhaps slightly more relaxed than they were a moment ago. And there is nothing you need to make happen here, because your hands already understand how to let go. They have done it many times before. Every night you have slept, every moment you have rested, every time you allowed yourself to stop doing. Your hands have remembered this state, and they are remembering it again now. And as that remembering deepens, something subtle begins to spread upward again, not tension but relief, a quiet easing that moves from the hands back through the arms and into the shoulders once more, and the shoulders respond, not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, as if something heavy that was once being carried is finally being set down, and in that setting down, a deep exhale begins to form inside the body. Not a breath you take intentionally, but a release that happens on its own. And that release is important because it signals safety, and when the body feels safe, it no longer needs to maintain effort. So now the shoulders begin to soften even more, dropping just slightly, not collapsing, not falling, just releasing like fabric finally loosening after being held tight for too long. And in that loosening, you may begin to feel your entire upper body becoming lighter emotionally, even as it becomes heavier physically. And that combination, heavy yet calm, still yet supported, is exactly where deep relaxation begins to form. And as you rest in that state, your awareness may begin to drift slightly inward, less focused on the outside world, less engaged with thought, more anchored in sensation, more present in the quiet experience of being here, and your breath continues in the background, steady, soft, unforced, like a slow rhythm that does not require your attention. And you don't need to follow it. You don't need to guide it. You only need to allow it to continue. And in that allowance, something even deeper begins to emerge, a subtle quietness beneath everything. Not silence you create, but silence you discover. And that silence is always here. It has been here all along. And now that everything else is slowing down, you are beginning to notice it again. And in that noticing, your entire nervous system begins to settle further as we gently continue into the next layer of letting go, layer of letting go. And now, as this quiet wave of release continues moving through your body, there is nothing you need to do to maintain it, nothing you need to hold on to, nothing you need to manage, because this process is happening on its own, naturally, gently, effortlessly. And you can simply allow it to continue unfolding in exactly the way it needs to. And as your awareness settles deeper into this moment, you may begin to notice your hands again, not as tools of doing, but as something that can finally stop doing. And there is a very subtle shift beginning here, a softening, a loosening, a quiet internal letting go. Because your hands have carried more than just physical movement throughout the day, they have carried intention, they have carried attention, they have carried subtle emotional weight without you even realizing it. Every small grip, every tiny tension, every unconscious holding pattern is simply the body preparing, responding, managing life. And now, for this moment, none of that is required, and so your hands begin to receive a different message, not from outside, but from within. A message that says, you don't need to hold anything right now, and your system begins to respond to that message immediately, not in thought, but in sensation. And you may begin to notice it first in the fingers, a slight loosening, a gentle uncurving, as if the need to maintain even the smallest level of control is starting to dissolve, and there is no effort in this, no instruction, only allowing, and as that allowing deepens, your palms begin to feel slightly different as well, perhaps a subtle warmth, perhaps a sense of openness, perhaps a quiet heaviness that feels more like support than strain. And that heaviness is important, because it is not resistance, it is release, it is the body choosing to stop holding. And as that choice happens naturally, the wrists begin to soften next. A quiet unbinding, a gentle release of subtle tension that may have been held there for hours or even longer without awareness, and now it is simply no longer needed, and so it lets go. And from the wrists, that same softness begins to travel upward again, into the forearms, where so much unseen activity is often stored, typing, reaching, holding, adjusting, reacting. All of it begins to slow now, not because you are forcing it, but because your body is no longer in doing mode. And as that shift deepens, something very important begins to happen. The nervous system starts to recognize safety, because stillness equals safety, and safety equals release, and release equals rest. And you don't need to think about that. Your body already understands it instinctively, and so the forearms begin to soften further, a slow unwinding sensation moving through the muscles, like tension slowly dissolving into warmth. And from there, that softness reaches the elbows, a place that often acts as a silent hinge between effort and rest, and now even that hinge begins to relax, as if the structure holding readiness in place is no longer necessary. And with that realization, a deeper wave of ease begins to move through your arms, not rushing, not sudden, but steady, continuous, natural. And as that wave continues upward, Your upper arms begin to respond, not with effort, but with surrender, a gentle sinking feeling, as if gravity is no longer something that pulls, but something that supports, and that shift changes everything. Because when gravity feels safe, the body stops resisting it, and when resistance stops, relaxation begins. And now, your arms may begin to feel heavier, but in a deeply comfortable way, like they are finally allowed to rest without obligation, no longer required to hold themselves in readiness, no longer preparing for anything, just existing, just being. And in that being, a quiet spaciousness begins to open inside you, a feeling that is difficult to describe with words, but easy to feel, a sense that nothing needs to be done right now, nothing needs to be held, nothing needs to be controlled, and in that realization, your entire upper body begins to soften further, because relaxation is contagious within the nervous system. One release leads to another, one softening creates space for the next, and now that softness begins to flow back into your hands once more, and you may notice something subtle here. Your fingers feel slightly more open than before, less structured, less active, less engaged, as if even the idea of holding on to anything feels unnecessary now. And that is important because your hands are symbolic of control, and when control begins to release here, it begins to release everywhere. And so now, your hands continue softening, becoming quieter, becoming stiller, becoming more at ease with not doing anything at all. And in that stillness, a deeper emotional quiet begins to form underneath everything else. A quiet that is not empty, but full of space, space to rest, space to slow down, space to let go. And as you rest in that space, your awareness begins to drift slightly deeper inward, less attached to physical sensation, and more connected to the feeling of simply existing, as we gently continue into the next layer of letting go. And now, as we gently continue, nothing you need to analyze, nothing you need to improve about how you are experiencing this moment, because your body already knows how to move deeper into ease on its own, naturally, without effort, and you can simply allow that process to continue, allow it to unfold in its own rhythm. And as your awareness gently rests here now, you may begin to notice your chest and heart area again, not as something heavy, not as something tense, but as something quietly beginning to open, softly, subtly, naturally. And there is no need to force that opening, because opening is not something you do, it is something that happens when nothing is being held tightly anymore. And so you might begin to notice a slight expansion in your chest with each breath, not large, not dramatic, just a gentle widening, like space slowly forming where there was once subtle compression. And that space does not need to be created. It is already there. It is simply being revealed. And as you continue to rest here, you may begin to notice something important happening beneath the surface. Your breathing is not just air moving in and out. It is a rhythm that is shaping your entire nervous system. And as that rhythm slows, your system responds not because you are telling it to, but because it is designed to follow safety. And right now, your body is beginning to interpret this moment as safe, safe to soften, safe to release, safe to let go. And that interpretation changes everything internally, because when the heart area feels safe, the entire body begins to follow. And so now, you may notice a gentle warmth beginning to spread through your chest, not heat from outside, but a soft internal warmth, a feeling of openness, a feeling of ease, as if something inside you has quietly exhaled for the first time today. And that exhale does not need to be controlled. It happens on its own, and as it happens, your chest begins to feel slightly lighter, not empty, but spacious. And that spaciousness is important, because space is where relaxation lives. And as that space grows, your awareness may begin to drift slightly deeper into your body, less into thinking, less into analyzing, more into simply feeling. And that feeling is quiet, soft, uncomplicated, just the experience of being here. And in that experience, something subtle begins to shift again. The sense of emotional holding begins to loosen, not because emotions are being pushed away, but because they are no longer being carried in the same way. And you don't need to label anything, you don't need to revisit anything, you don't need to solve anything from the past or future, because right now, none of that is required. And in that realization, your chest begins to open just a little more, as if the heart area is no longer preparing to protect itself, no longer preparing to react, no longer preparing to hold emotional tension, and instead simply allowing itself to be. And that shift creates a deeper internal quiet, a quiet that is not forced but revealed, because beneath all tension there is always quiet. And now you are beginning to notice it again. And as you rest in that quiet, your breath continues softly in the background, inhaling and exhaling without effort, without control. And you may begin to notice that each exhale feels slightly longer than the inhale, a natural sign of relaxation beginning to deepen, not something you are doing, but something your body is allowing. And as that continues, your chest begins to feel even more open, as if the space inside you is gently expanding outward, not physically large, but internally spacious, like the feeling of standing in a wide, open landscape after being inside for too long. And that spaciousness allows something very important to happen. Your mind begins to slow down, not because you are forcing thoughts to stop, but because there is less tension feeding them. And without tension, thoughts lose urgency, and without urgency, they begin to fade into the background. And that fading creates even more space, and that space creates even more calm, and that calm creates even more letting go. And so the cycle continues naturally, without effort, without direction, without resistance. And as you remain here, your chest continues to soften gently, each breath slightly easier than the last, each moment slightly quieter than the one before. And somewhere beneath all of this, a deeper sense of safety begins to settle into your system, not mental safety, but physical, emotional safety, the kind of safety that tells your body, you do not need to stay alert anymore. You can rest now, you can soften now, you can let go now. And your body understands this message instinctively, because it has been waiting for permission like this all day, and now it is receiving it. And as that permission settles deeper, your entire upper body begins to respond again, not with effort but with release, a slow softening through the chest, a gentle easing through the ribs, a quiet relaxation spreading through the heart space, as if everything inside you is gradually loosening its grip on the day. And that loosening is not loss, it is relief, and relief is one of the deepest forms of rest. And as that relief continues to grow, your awareness may begin to drift even more inward, less focused on the outer world, more absorbed in this gentle internal experience, as we naturally continue into the next layer of letting go, as this gentle unfolding continue. And now, as this gentle unfolding continues, there is nothing you need to adjust about the way your body is responding, nothing you need to evaluate, nothing you need to improve, because everything that is happening right now is already moving in the direction of rest, on its own, naturally. without effort, and you can simply allow that process to continue. Allow it to deepen in its own way. Allow it to unfold without interruption. And as your awareness settles more fully into this moment, you may begin to notice your back again, not as something holding tension, but as something that is finally being supported, truly supported, completely supported, and that support has been there the entire time, even before you noticed it, even before you became aware of it. It has always been holding you quietly, without asking for anything in return. And now you are beginning to feel it more clearly, and that feeling changes something very subtle inside you, because your back does not need to hold you up alone right now. It does not need to maintain structure. It does not need to keep everything aligned through effort. And as that realization settles in, something begins to soften, a quiet internal release. Not sudden, not dramatic, but gradual, like something slowly remembering it can stop working for a while. And as that remembering deepens, you may begin to feel your back sinking slightly into the surface beneath you, not falling, not collapsing, just yielding, allowing, letting go of subtle resistance. And that yielding is important, because resistance is what creates tension, and when resistance dissolves, relaxation naturally appears. And so now, your entire back begins to respond, starting at the upper back, where so much invisible holding often lives. Responsibility, awareness, mental effort, emotional readiness, all of it begins to soften now. Not because you are trying to release it, but because you no longer need to hold it in the same way. And that shift is gentle, almost unnoticeable, but deeply real. And as that softening continues, a subtle wave of ease begins to move downward through your spine, not as a force, but as a release, like tension slowly dissolving layer by layer, vertebra by vertebra, moment by moment, without needing direction. And you don't need to follow it. You don't need to guide it. You only need to allow it, because allowing is enough. And as that wave moves through your back, you may begin to notice something interesting happening. Your body feels heavier, but in a way that feels safe, grounded, held, as if gravity is no longer something pulling you down, but something holding you gently in place so you can rest more deeply. And that shift in perception is powerful, because when gravity feels safe, effort becomes unnecessary. And when effort becomes unnecessary, rest begins. And so now, your back continues to soften, each breath allowing a little more space, each exhale releasing something subtle that was no longer needed. And you may notice your awareness becoming quieter too, less focused on thinking, less focused on analyzing, more focused on simply being here. And that being is enough. Nothing more is required. And as you continue to rest in this awareness, something deeper begins to emerge beneath everything else. A sense of internal permission, not from outside, but from within. A quiet inner understanding that says, you don't have to hold yourself together right now. Repetition, because your body already understands it. And now, it begins to respond more fully. The shoulders begin to loosen slightly more. The spine begins to feel less structured. The entire back begins to soften into the surface beneath you, as if it is finally being allowed to fully rest without responsibility. And that release is not loss. It is relief, deep relief, the kind that does not need explanation. And as that relief grows, your breathing continues quietly in the background, soft, slow, unforced, like a gentle rhythm that does not require your attention. And you don't need to guide it. You only need to let it be there. And in that allowing, your entire nervous system begins to slow further, because the back is one of the central holding structures of the body, and when it softens, everything else follows. And so now, a deeper sense of stillness begins to form inside you. Not empty stillness, but full stillness, the kind that feels like space opening inside awareness. and that space is where rest begins to deepen even more. And as you remain here, you may begin to notice that thoughts are becoming less important again, not forced away, just less compelling, less urgent, less demanding of attention, and in their absence, calm begins to expand naturally, effortlessly, and as that calm expands, your back continues to settle deeper into support, deeper into stillness, deeper into ease, as if every part of your spine is slowly remembering what it feels like to stop working for a while, and that remembering is enough, and in that softness, your awareness begins to drift even further inward as we gently continue into the next layer of letting go, as this gentle unfolding, as this gentle nothing begun, naturally, quietly, effortlessly. And you can simply allow it to deepen without interference, allow it to continue without guidance. And as your awareness settles more fully into this moment, you may begin to notice your belly area now, a place that often holds more than we realize, not just physical tension, but emotional holding, subtle protective tightening, quiet readiness, the unconscious sense of needing to stay prepared, and yet none of that is needed right now, not in this moment, not here. And as that truth gently settles within you, something begins to shift, a softening, a release, a quiet internal surrender, and you may notice it first as a subtle change in sensation, not dramatic, not sudden, just a gentle easing, as if your belly is no longer required to stay slightly braced against life, and that bracing, that subtle inner holding, can begin to dissolve now, slowly, naturally, without effort. And as it dissolves, your entire core begins to respond, not because you are doing anything, but because your system is finally receiving permission to relax, and that permission is enough. And so now you may begin to feel your belly softening in layers, not all at once, but gradually, like a slow exhale that never fully ends. And with each passing moment, that softness becomes a little deeper, a little wider, a little more complete, and you don't need to guide it because your body already knows the way. And as that softness grows, something very subtle begins to happen beneath it, a feeling of release that moves through the entire core of your body, not from effort, but from letting go. And that letting go is important because the belly is often where we unconsciously hold emotional weight, stress, expectation, responsibility, internal pressure. All of it can quietly settle here without awareness. And now, for this moment, none of it needs to remain in the same way. And so your body begins to respond, a gentle loosening, a quiet unwinding, as if the center of your body is slowly exhaling after holding its breath for too long. And that exhale does not need to be controlled. It happens on its own, and as it happens, a deeper sense of space begins to open inside you. Not physical space, but internal space. A feeling of expansion, a feeling of ease, as if something inside you has softened enough to allow room for stillness, and that stillness begins to grow naturally, quietly, without effort. And you don't need to fill it, you don't need to change it, you only need to allow it. And as that stillness deepens, your breathing continues softly in the background, gentle, rhythmic, unforced, like waves moving in and out of a calm shore. And you may notice that your breath now feels slightly lower in your body, not high in the chest, but gently connected to the belly. And that connection is important because breath in the belly signals safety, and safety signals release, and release signals rest. And so now, your belly continues to soften, each breath encouraging a little more ease, each exhale releasing a little more holding. And you may begin to notice a subtle warmth spreading through your core, not external heat, but internal comfort, a sense of settling, as if your body is slowly sinking into a deeper state of trust. And that trust is not mental, it is physical, it is emotional, it is instinctive. And as that trust grows, your entire midsection begins to feel lighter, not empty, but free. And that freedom allows something deeper to unfold. A quiet sense of surrender, not forced surrender, not emotional overwhelm, but gentle letting go, as if your system is finally saying, I don't need to hold on anymore. And that realization does not need to be repeated, because your body already understands it. And so the belly continues to soften, deeper, wider, more completely, as if every layer of tension is slowly dissolving into warmth and stillness. And as that happens, your awareness begins to drift slightly deeper inward, less attached to thought, less engaged with effort, more anchored in sensation, more grounded in calm. And in that calm, a deeper quiet begins to form underneath everything else, a quiet that is always present, but often unnoticed. And now, you are beginning to notice it again, and in that noticing, your entire system begins to settle further. As we gently continue into the next layer of letting go, our system begins this gentle unfolding. Nothing you need to correct, nothing you need to guide, because your body already knows exactly how to continue this process of letting go, naturally, quietly, effortlessly, and you can simply allow it to deepen in its own rhythm, allow it to unfold without interruption. And as your awareness gently settles further into your body, you may begin to notice your lower body now, your hips, your pelvis, the base of your structure, the foundation upon which everything else rests. And this area, more than most, often carries subtle layers of holding. Not always noticeable, not always obvious, but deeply present, because the lower body is where stability is maintained, where balance is supported, where readiness for movement quietly lives. And yet, in this moment, none of that is needed, not here, not now. And as that realization gently settles within you, something begins to shift, a softening, a release, a quiet internal surrender. And you may notice it first as a subtle sense of weight, not uncomfortable weight, but grounding weight, as if your hips are finally being allowed to rest fully into the support beneath you, no longer holding themselves slightly elevated in readiness, no longer maintaining subtle tension for movement, just settling. And that settling is important, because settling is what happens when resistance begins to dissolve, and as resistance dissolves, relaxation naturally emerges. And so now your hips begin to soften in layers, not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, like a slow unwinding that begins deep inside the body. And as that unwinding continues, you may begin to feel a gentle release spreading through the pelvic area, a quiet easing of muscles that often remain unnoticed throughout the day, holding, stabilizing, balancing, supporting. All of it begins to soften now, without effort, without instruction. And you don't need to do anything to make it happen, because your body already understands how to release what is no longer needed. And as that release deepens, a subtle warmth may begin to appear in the lower body. Not external heat, but internal comfort, a feeling of being supported from within, a feeling of being held without effort, and that feeling allows something very important to happen. Your entire lower body begins to relax more fully into gravity, not resisting it, not controlling it, but allowing it. And that allowance changes everything, because when the hips relax, the spine responds. When the base softens, the upper body follows. When grounding deepens, the entire system slows, and so now a gentle wave of ease begins to travel downward through your thighs, not rushed, not forced, but steady, natural, continuous, and your thighs begin to feel slightly heavier, not in a burdensome way, but in a deeply restful way, as if they are finally being allowed to stop preparing for movement, stop preparing for action, stop preparing for what comes next, and instead simply rest. And as that rest deepens, the knees begin to soften next, a quiet release of tension in the joints that often hold unconscious readiness, and that readiness can now dissolve because nothing is required from them right now, and so they let go. And from the knees, that softness continues into the calves, a slow easing sensation moving through the lower legs, like tension gently melting into stillness. And you don't need to track it, you don't need to follow it, you only need to allow it, because allowing is enough. And as that allowing continues, your ankles begin to soften as well, a subtle loosening, a quiet unbinding, as if even the smallest stabilizing structures of the body are finally allowed to rest. And from the ankles, that softness flows into your feet, and your feet, which carry you through every moment of your day. Every step, every direction, every movement are now being invited into something completely different. Stillness, rest, non-doing, and you may begin to notice your toes gently relaxing now, a soft release of grip, a quiet unwinding of effort, as if even the smallest muscles are remembering they do not need to hold anything anymore. And in that remembering, a deeper sense of calm begins to form, not in one place, but throughout the entire lower body, a field of softness, a field of heaviness, a field of complete support. And in that field, your awareness begins to drift even further inward, less attached to physical sensation, more connected to the feeling of simply being, and that being is enough. Nothing more is required, nothing more is needed, and as you rest in that space, your breathing continues gently in the background, slow, soft, unforced, like a rhythm that no longer requires attention, and you may notice that your entire lower body now feels fully grounded, completely supported, deeply settled, as if every part of you from hips to feet is being gently held by something larger than effort. And that realization creates a deeper calm, a deeper stillness, a deeper letting go. And as that stillness expands, your awareness begins to soften further as we gently continue into the next layer of letting go. As-safandini. And now, as this gentle journey, al-resting, naturally, without effort, and you can simply allow that process to deepen, allow it to continue unfolding in its own way, allow it to move you even deeper into stillness. And as your awareness settles more fully into this moment, something begins to shift again, a sense of completeness, a sense of full body support, as if every part of you is now equally held, equally safe, equally allowed to rest. And that realization brings a quiet internal release, because there is nothing left that needs to be carried in this moment, nothing left that needs to be managed, nothing left that needs to be maintained through effort. And as that understanding gently settles within your system, you may begin to notice a deeper stillness emerging, not sudden, not forced, but slowly, naturally, like mist settling over calm water. And in that stillness, your entire body begins to feel unified, not separate parts anymore, not individual areas relaxing on their own, but one continuous field of ease, from head to shoulders, to chest, to belly, to hips, to legs, all the way down to your feet. Everything is now connected through softness, and that softness is important, because softness is what allows surrender, and surrender is what allows rest, and rest is what allows healing. And so now, you may begin to notice something subtle happening beneath everything else, a quiet sense that you are no longer holding anything together, not physically, not mentally, not emotionally. Everything that needed your effort throughout the day can now simply rest. And that realization does not require thought. It is felt deeply, quietly, naturally. And as that feeling grows, your awareness begins to soften further inward, less focused on the outer world, less attached to thought, more anchored in sensation, more connected to stillness. And in that stillness, something very gentle begins to open inside you. A spaciousness, not physical space, but inner space, a sense of openness that was always there, but is now becoming more noticeable as tension dissolves. And you don't need to create that space, you only need to notice it, because noticing is enough. And as you rest in that awareness, your breathing continues softly in the background, inhaling, exhaling, slowly, effortlessly, like waves moving in and out of a quiet shore. And you may notice that your breath now feels slightly deeper, slightly smoother, slightly more natural, not controlled, not directed, just happening. And that just happening is where relaxation deepens, because effort is no longer interfering. And as effort fades, your entire system begins to slow even more, as if time itself is becoming less important, less noticeable, less urgent. And in that slowing, a deeper calm begins to form beneath everything. A calm that is not created, but revealed, because it has always been there, waiting beneath activity, waiting beneath thought, waiting beneath effort. And now, it is gently rising into awareness. And as that calm becomes more present, your body begins to feel even heavier, not in a restrictive way, but in a deeply supported way, as if the surface beneath you is not just holding you, but receiving you, welcoming you, supporting you completely. And that feeling allows something important to happen. Your nervous system begins to recognize safety at a deeper level, not mental safety, but physical, emotional safety, the kind of safety that says you do not need to stay alert anymore, you do not need to prepare for anything anymore, you can let go now, and your body responds immediately, not with thought, but with release, and that release moves gently through you again, like a soft internal wave, easing the last traces of effort, soothing the remaining edges of tension, and bringing you even closer to complete rest. And as that rest deepens, your awareness begins to drift even further inward, less attached to sensation, less attached to thought, more immersed in stillness itself, as we gently continue into the next layer of letting go. As layer of letting go. And now, as this gentle unfolding continues within you, there is nothing you need to do with your mind, nothing you need to fix, nothing you need to analyze or understand, because your mind is already beginning to do something very natural. It is slowing down, not because you are forcing it, but because it is finally being allowed to rest, and you can simply allow that process to continue. Allow thoughts to come and go without needing to hold on to them. Allow mental activity to soften in its own time. Allow quiet to gradually take its place. And as you rest here, you may begin to notice something subtle happening. Thoughts are still present, but they feel further away now, less important, less demanding, less urgent, as if they are no longer pulling your attention in the same way. And that distance is important, because distance creates space, and space creates calm, and calm allows rest. And so now, your mind begins to experience that space more clearly, a gentle widening, a softening of mental activity, as if everything inside your awareness is slowly becoming less dense, less crowded, less active. And you don't need to clear your mind. You only need to let it become quiet on its own, because quiet is your natural state beneath all thinking. And as that quiet begins to emerge, you may notice your attention drifting more inward, less outward awareness, less engagement with external thoughts, more connection to the simple experience of being here. And that being here is enough. Nothing more is required. And as you stay with this gentle awareness, something deeper begins to happen. The rhythm of thought begins to slow, not suddenly, not completely, but gradually, like waves becoming smaller, softer, farther apart. And between those thoughts, you begin to notice something new, silence, not empty silence, but alive silence, a silence that feels supportive, a silence that feels safe, a silence that feels like rest. And in that silence, your nervous system begins to settle even more deeply, because the mind and body are always connected. And when one slows, the other follows. And so now, your entire system begins to shift into a quieter state, not active, not alert, but deeply receptive. And in that receptivity, something very gentle begins to expand inside you, a sense of inner spaciousness, not physical space, but mental and emotional space, a feeling that nothing is pressing in on you anymore, nothing demanding attention, nothing requiring immediate response, and that space allows something very important to happen. Your awareness begins to soften completely, no longer scanning, no longer searching, no longer holding on to anything in particular, just resting, just being. And in that being, a deeper layer of calm begins to rise from within, not introduced from outside, but revealed from inside. Because calm has always been here. It is the background of all experience, and now it is becoming more noticeable than the thoughts themselves. And as that calm grows, your breathing continues softly in the background, natural, unforced, effortless, like a slow rhythm that does not require your participation. And you don't need to follow it. You don't need to adjust it. You only need to allow it to continue. And in that allowance, your mind begins to drift even further into stillness. Thoughts no longer forming complete patterns, images fading before they fully develop, ideas losing momentum before they take shape, and all of that creates even more quiet, even more space, even more ease. And you may begin to notice a gentle heaviness in your awareness now, not mental pressure, but mental rest, as if your thinking mind is slowly laying down its activity for a while, and that laying down is not loss, it is relief, deep relief, the kind that comes when something no longer needs to be maintained. And as that relief grows, your entire experience begins to soften further, as if everything inside you is slowing down together, synchronizing into one calm rhythm, one steady state of ease, one unified sense of stillness. And in that stillness, there is nothing missing, nothing incomplete, nothing needing attention, just this moment, just this breath, just this quiet awareness, and that is enough. And as you remain here, your awareness begins to drift even deeper inward as we gently continue into the next layer of letting go. As this quiet journey continues within you, there is nothing you need to change, nothing you need to fix, nothing you need to understand more deeply than you already do, because your body already knows how to continue this process of deep rest on its own, naturally, without effort, and you can simply allow it to continue unfolding gently, allow it to move you deeper into stillness. And as your awareness rests here now, you may begin to notice something very subtle. The entire body feels quieter than before, not because anything is missing, but because everything unnecessary is beginning to fall away, and that falling away does not happen suddenly. It happens gradually, like dust settling after a long, gentle wind. And as that settling continues, your system begins to feel more unified, less fragmented, less divided between parts, more whole, more connected. And that wholeness creates a very important shift inside you, a sense that you are no longer separate from relaxation. You are becoming relaxation, not doing it, not achieving it, but being it. And that is enough. And as that sense deepens, your awareness begins to soften even further inward, less focused on thoughts, less attached to sensations, more immersed in a quiet internal space, a space that feels open, safe, uncluttered, and in that space, something very gentle begins to emerge, a deep internal quiet that was always present beneath everything else, not created now, but revealed now, because everything else is slowing down enough for it to be noticed. And as that quiet becomes more present, your breathing continues softly in the background, slow, natural, effortless, like waves arriving and leaving without resistance. And you don't need to shape it, you don't need to follow it, you only need to allow it. And in that allowing, your entire nervous system begins to shift even deeper, not into sleep yet, but into the space just before sleep, that quiet threshold where everything becomes softer, slower, more fluid, and in that threshold, thoughts begin to lose structure, not stopping abruptly, but dissolving at the edges, becoming less defined, less urgent, less meaningful, and that fading creates more space, and that space creates more calm, and that calm allows even deeper letting go. And so now, your entire body begins to feel heavier again, not in a restrictive way, but in a deeply supported way, as if the surface beneath you is no longer something you are resting on, but something that is holding you completely, and that support allows something important to happen. Your system stops trying to maintain itself, stops adjusting, stops managing, and in that stopping, relaxation becomes deeper than before, and as that relaxation spreads, you may begin to notice your awareness drifting more inward again, less focused on external experience, more anchored in internal stillness. And that stillness is not empty. It is full of quiet presence, a presence that feels steady, stable, unchanging. And in that stability, your body begins to soften even more, as if every remaining trace of effort is now unnecessary, and that unnecessary effort simply begins to fade away, naturally, quietly, without resistance, and you don't need to help it fade, because it is already fading on its own, and as that fading continues, a deeper sense of ease begins to spread through everything, not localized, but total, whole-body ease, a sense that nothing inside you is working anymore, everything is resting, everything is supported, everything is allowed, and in that allowance, something very subtle opens inside awareness, a feeling of deep safety, not mental safety, but physical and emotional safety combined, the kind of safety that tells your body, you can stop now, you don't need to continue holding anything, you are safe to let go completely, and your body responds immediately, not with thought, but with release. And that release moves gently through everything, softening, widening, deepening, until even the idea of effort begins to disappear. And in that disappearance, there is only stillness, only calm, only quiet presence. And that presence is enough. Nothing more is needed, nothing more is required. And as you remain here, your awareness begins to drift even deeper inward as we gently continue into the next layer of letting go. And now, as this gentle unfolding continues within you, there is nothing you need to hold on to anymore. Nothing you need to maintain, nothing you need to keep active in your awareness, because everything that needed your effort today is already beginning to soften into stillness. And you can simply allow it to continue without interruption, allow it to deepen without resistance, and as you rest here now, something very subtle begins to happen, a feeling of sinking, not falling, not losing control, but gently sinking like something finally being allowed to settle exactly where it belongs. And that sinking is not something you do, it is something you allow, because your body already knows the way. And as that sinking continues, your entire system begins to feel quieter, not because anything has been removed, but because everything unnecessary is beginning to fade. And that fading is natural. It happens when effort is no longer required. And so now, you may begin to notice your awareness softening further inward, less focused on thought, less engaged with interpretation, more connected to sensation, more anchored in stillness. And that stillness is not empty, it is full of quiet presence, a presence that feels safe, stable, supportive. And as that presence grows, your breathing continues softly in the background, gentle, even, unforced, like a slow tide moving in and out of calm shorelines. And you don't need to shape it, you don't need to follow it, you only need to allow it. And in that allowing, your entire body begins to respond again, a deeper release, not sudden, not dramatic, but continuous, like layers of tension quietly dissolving one by one. And as that dissolution continues, your sense of the outer world begins to fade slightly, not disappearing completely, but becoming less relevant, less immediate, less important than the calm you are now experiencing. And that shift is important, because when the outer world becomes less demanding, the inner world becomes more spacious, and in that space, something very gentle begins to open, a deeper sense of ease, not created, but revealed, because ease was always there beneath everything else, and now it is becoming easier to notice. And as you remain here, your body continues to soften in its own natural rhythm, no effort required, no direction needed, just allowing. And that allowing begins to spread through everything, through your thoughts, through your breath, through your physical sensations, through the quiet background of awareness itself, and all of it begins to move into a shared state of calm, a unified field of rest. And in that field, there is no need to do anything at all, no need to hold anything, no need to maintain anything, just this moment, just this stillness, just this gentle unfolding into ease. And as that ease deepens, you may notice something very subtle happening beneath everything else. A soft internal release, like something inside you is finally exhaling fully for the first time today. And that exhale is not just breath, it is letting go of tension, letting go of effort, letting go of the need to remain alert. And as that letting go continues, your entire system begins to slow further, not abruptly, but naturally, like everything inside you is gradually agreeing to rest. And in that agreement, stillness becomes deeper, quieter, more complete. And as that stillness settles, your awareness begins to drift even more inward, less attached to sensation, less attached to thought, more absorbed in the quiet space beneath everything, as we gently continue into the next layer of letting go. As this gentle unfolding continues within you, as this gentle unfind understand or interpret, because your awareness is already beginning to soften in a very natural way. And you can simply allow it to continue without interruption, allow it to deepen without effort. And as you rest here now, something very subtle begins to change again, a quiet fading of attention, not a loss, but a soft withdrawal from effort, as if your mind is no longer interested in holding on to anything tightly. And that loosening is important, because holding creates tension, and letting go creates space, and space allows rest. And so now your awareness begins to drift more inward than before, less connected to external thoughts, less engaged with mental activity, more absorbed in a quiet internal stillness. And that stillness is not empty, it is full of calm presence, a presence that does not demand anything from you, a presence that simply allows you to be, and as that presence deepens, your breathing continues softly in the background, slow, gentle, unforced, like a steady rhythm that requires no participation, and you don't need to guide it, you don't need to control it, you only need to allow it to continue, and in that allowing, your entire nervous system begins to soften further, not in a single moment, but in layers, like something slowly melting into comfort, and as that comfort grows, your body begins to feel heavier again, not uncomfortable heaviness, but deeply supported heaviness, as if the surface beneath you is no longer just holding you, but fully receiving you, and that receiving creates safety, and safety creates surrender, and surrender creates rest. And so now, your entire system begins to settle even more deeply. Thoughts that may have still been faintly present begin to lose clarity, not pushed away, but naturally fading, like distant echoes becoming softer and softer. And in their place, silence begins to grow, not forced silence, but natural silence, a silence that feels stable, grounded, comforting, and as that silence expands, your awareness begins to shift again, less focused on thinking, less attached to interpretation, more grounded in pure sensation, the feeling of being here, the feeling of resting, the feeling of simply existing, and that existence is enough, nothing more is required, and as you remain here, something very gentle begins to unfold beneath everything else, a sense of release that goes deeper than before, not physical alone, not mental alone, but a full system release, as if everything inside you is slowly agreeing, there is nothing left to hold, and that agreement does not need to be verbal, it is felt deeply, quietly, naturally, and as that feeling settles in, your entire inner world begins to slow further, like everything is moving into a softer rhythm, a slower rhythm, a quieter rhythm, and in that rhythm, there is no urgency, no pressure, no demand, only stillness, only ease, only this moment. And as that moment expands, you may notice something very subtle happening. Your sense of identity begins to soften at the edges, not disappearing, but becoming less rigid, less defined, less active, as if you are no longer holding yourself together in the same way, and that softening is safe, because there is nothing to maintain right now, nothing to protect, nothing to manage, and so you can simply drift deeper into stillness, drift deeper into ease, drift deeper into letting go. And as that drifting continues, your awareness becomes quieter than before, less reactive, less engaged, more open, more receptive, more still, and in that stillness, something very peaceful begins to emerge, a sense of deep inner rest that does not depend on anything external, a rest that comes from within, a rest that has always been here, and now you are simply returning to it. And as you continue to rest here, your awareness begins to drift even further inward as we gently continue into the next layer of letting go, layer of letting go, and quiet journey continues within you. There is nothing you need to think about, nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to hold in your awareness, because thinking itself is already beginning to slow down, naturally, softly, without effort, and you can simply allow it to continue easing in its own rhythm, allow it to soften further on its own. And as you rest here now, you may begin to notice something very subtle happening within your mind. Thoughts are still there, but they are becoming quieter, less defined, less connected, less insistent, as if they are no longer forming full shapes, only faint impressions that pass through gently and fade away. And that fading is important because it creates space, and space creates silence. and silence allows rest. And so now, your awareness begins to settle into that space more fully, not chasing thoughts, not holding on to thoughts, just observing them drift further away. And as that drifting continues, something very gentle begins to happen beneath it all. A widening, not physical but internal, a soft expansion of awareness itself. As if your mind is no longer confined to tight patterns of thinking, but opening into something much larger, much quieter, much more peaceful, and in that openness, your nervous system begins to respond, because mind and body are never separate. When one softens, the other follows, and so now your entire system begins to slow again, not abruptly but gradually, like a tide gently pulling back from the shore. And as that tide recedes, you may begin to notice a deeper sense of stillness forming inside you, a stillness that is not empty, but full of quiet presence, a presence that feels safe, steady, unchanging, and as that presence grows, your breathing continues softly in the background, slow, even, effortless, like waves moving in and out without resistance. And you don't need to guide it. You don't need to shape it. You only need to allow it. And in that allowing, your awareness begins to drift further inward again, less attached to external reality, less connected to mental activity, more anchored in pure experience, the experience of being here, the experience of resting, the experience of simply existing, and that existence is enough. Nothing more is required, and as you remain here, something very subtle begins to shift again. The space between thoughts begins to expand, not because thoughts are being removed, but because they are losing intensity, and in that loss of intensity, silence begins to appear more clearly, not forced silence, but natural silence, a silence that feels alive, a silence that feels grounding, a silence that feels like deep rest. And as that silence grows, your awareness begins to soften even further, as if everything inside you is gently loosening its grip, not suddenly, but continuously, like tension dissolving layer by layer. And in that dissolving, a deeper sense of ease begins to form, not created, but revealed, because ease was always there beneath everything else. And now it is becoming easier to notice. And as that ease becomes more present, your sense of self begins to soften slightly, not disappearing, but becoming less rigid, less active, less involved, as if you no longer need to hold yourself together in the same way. And that is safe, because nothing needs to be held right now. Nothing needs to be maintained. Nothing needs to be controlled. And so you can simply drift deeper into stillness, drift deeper into quiet, drift deeper into letting go. And as that drifting continues, your awareness becomes even softer than before, like everything is moving into a lower gear, a slower rhythm, a quieter flow. And in that flow, there is only ease, only calm, only this moment. And as you rest here, your awareness begins to drift even further inward as we gently continue into the next layer of letting go. As this deep journey continue, and now, as this deep journey continues within you, there is nothing you need to focus on anymore, nothing you need to observe, nothing you need to analyze or understand, because your awareness is already beginning to soften into stillness, naturally, quietly, effortlessly, and you can simply allow it to continue unfolding without interruption, allow it to deepen without resistance, and as you rest here now, something very subtle begins to change again, a quiet fading of awareness itself, not sudden, not forced, but gentle, like mist slowly dissolving into open air. And that fading is important because it creates space, and space allows stillness, and stillness allows rest. And so now your entire system begins to settle even further, not because anything is being removed, but because everything unnecessary is naturally letting go. And in that letting go, you may begin to notice a deeper silence forming within you, not external silence, but internal silence, a silence that feels wide, soft, stable. And that silence is not empty. It is full of calm presence, a presence that does not demand anything from you, a presence that simply allows you to be. And as that presence grows, your breathing continues gently in the background, slow, even, unforced, like a rhythm that requires no attention. And you don't need to guide it, you don't need to shape it, you only need to allow it. And in that allowing, your awareness begins to drift even deeper inward, less connected to thought, less engaged with sensation, more absorbed in stillness itself. And that stillness is not something you enter, it is something you uncover, because it has always been here, beneath thinking, beneath effort, beneath awareness, and now it is becoming easier to notice. And as that stillness becomes clearer, your entire body begins to feel heavier again, not in a restrictive way, but in a deeply supported way, as if you are being held completely without needing to hold yourself at all. And that support creates safety, and safety creates release, and release creates deeper stillness. And so now your system begins to slow even more. Thoughts that were once faint are now dissolving further, not pushed away, just losing structure, losing clarity, losing urgency. And in that loss, quiet begins to take their place, not forced quiet, but natural quiet, a quiet that feels steady, grounded, comforting. And as that quiet expands, your awareness begins to soften again, as if every part of you is slowly loosening its grip on activity, not all at once, but layer by layer, moment by moment. And in that loosening, a deeper sense of ease begins to emerge, not created, but revealed, because ease has always been here beneath everything else. And now, it is rising into awareness more clearly. And as you continue to rest here, your sense of individuality begins to soften slightly at the edges, not disappearing, but relaxing, becoming less defined, less active, less effortful, as if you no longer need to maintain yourself in the same way. And that is safe, because nothing needs to be maintained right now, nothing needs to be controlled, nothing needs to be managed. And so you can simply drift deeper into stillness, drift deeper into quiet, drift deeper into letting go. And as that drifting continues, your awareness becomes softer than before, like everything is slowing into a lower, calmer rhythm. And in that rhythm, there is no urgency, no pressure, no demand, only calm, only ease, only this moment. And as that moment expands, something very subtle begins to happen beneath everything else, a feeling of complete inner surrender, not emotional struggle, not effortful release, but natural surrender, as if your entire system is finally saying, there is nothing left to do now. And that realization does not require thought. It is felt deeply, quietly, naturally. And as that feeling settles in, your entire experience begins to soften even further, as if everything inside you is gradually dissolving into stillness, not disappearing, but becoming peaceful. And in that peacefulness, there is only quiet presence, only gentle awareness, only deep rest. And as you remain here, your awareness begins to drift even further inward, as we gently continue into the final layers of letting go. As we gently begin to drift even final layers, nothing you need to maintain, nothing you need to continue doing in order to reach a deeper state, because you are already here, already settling, already resting, and you can simply allow that. Allow it to continue unfolding without effort. Allow it to deepen naturally on its own. And as you rest here now, something very quiet begins to happen. A sense of effort itself begins to fade, not suddenly, but gently, like mist dissolving into still air. And that fading is important because effort is what keeps the mind active, and when effort dissolves, stillness becomes unavoidable. And so now your entire system begins to slow again, not because you are trying to slow it, but because nothing is pushing it forward anymore. And in that absence of pushing, everything naturally settles, like water becoming still when the wind finally stops. And in that stillness, you may begin to notice a deeper silence forming within you. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of needing, the absence of holding, the absence of becoming anything other than what is already here. And that silence is not empty, it is full of calm presence, a presence that does not require effort, a presence that does not ask anything from you, a presence that simply allows you to rest. And as that presence grows, your breathing continues softly in the background, slow, natural, unforced, like a rhythm that belongs to the body itself, and you don't need to guide it, you don't need to shape it, you only need to allow it. And in that allowing, your awareness begins to drift even deeper inward, less connected to thought, less connected to sensation, more absorbed in stillness itself. And that stillness is not something new. It has always been here, but now it is becoming more noticeable than everything else. And as that stillness becomes clearer, your entire body begins to feel heavier again, not in resistance, but in support, as if you are being held completely by something larger than effort, something steady, something safe, something constant. And that sense of being held allows something very important to happen. Your nervous system begins to relax even further, because safety is the language it understands most deeply, and now it is hearing that language clearly and responding. And so now your thoughts begin to fade even more, not pushed away, but losing structure, losing urgency, losing importance, like distant echoes dissolving into silence. And in their place, a deeper quiet begins to emerge, a quiet that feels natural, stable, unchanging. And as that quiet expands, your awareness begins to soften again, as if every part of you is gently releasing its grip on effort, not all at once, but layer by layer, moment by moment. And in that release, a deeper sense of ease begins to appear, not created, but revealed, because ease was always here beneath everything else. And now, it is rising more clearly into awareness, and as you continue to rest here, even the sense of trying begins to fade completely, not replaced, not redirected, just no longer present. And in that absence, something very peaceful takes its place, pure rest, uninterrupted stillness, and you don't need to define it. You don't need to understand it. You only need to experience it. And as that experience deepens, your entire system continues to settle, slower, quieter, softer, until everything inside you feels like it is gently resting at the bottom of calm. Nothing above you pulling, nothing within you pushing, just this moment, just this breath, just this stillness. And as you remain here, your awareness begins to drift even further inward as we gently continue into the final layer of letting go. And now it's this final layer of letting go into the final layer there's nothing left to reach, already released. And you can simply allow yourself to remain here, to stay here, to drift here. And as you rest in this final space, something very subtle begins to happen. Even the idea of effort begins to dissolve completely, not resisted, not pushed away, just naturally fading, like the last light of day slipping into night. And that fading is important because effort is what keeps the mind engaged, and when effort disappears, only stillness remains. And so now, your entire system begins to settle into its deepest level yet, not because you are trying, but because there is nothing left pulling you anywhere else. And in that absence of pulling, everything softens, everything slows, everything rests, and you may begin to notice a profound silence forming within you now, not external silence, but total inner silence, a silence that is not empty, but complete, stable, deep, and in that silence, there is no need to become anything else, no need to change, no need to continue, only presence, only calm, only this moment, and as that presence expands, your breathing continues gently in the background, slow, natural, effortless, like the final waves of the ocean settling completely flat after all movement has stopped, and you don't need to shape it, you don't need to guide it, you only need to allow it, and in that allowing, your awareness begins to drift beyond thought entirely, not into sleep yet, but into the threshold where thought no longer matters, where sensation becomes softer, where awareness itself becomes still, and in that stillness, something very profound happens, a complete letting go, not partial, not gradual, but whole, as if every part of you finally understands. There is nothing left to hold. And in that understanding, everything releases, gently, naturally, completely. And as that release deepens, your body feels heavier than before. Not weight of burden, but weight of deep support, as if you are being held by something infinite and kind, something steady, something unchanging, something always there beneath everything. And that support allows your nervous system to fully unwind now, no longer scanning, no longer holding, no longer preparing, just resting, fully, completely. And as that rest deepens, your thoughts become almost imperceptible, not forced away, just no longer forming clearly like distant echoes dissolving into vast quiet space. And in that space, there is only calm, only softness, only stillness, and as you remain here, even the sense of you begins to soften gently, not disappearing but relaxing beyond effort, beyond structure, beyond tension, until there is only experience, only presence, only peace, and that peace is not something you arrived at, it is something you uncovered, because it was always here, and now nothing is covering it anymore, and so you rest, deeper than before, quieter than before, softer than before, and there is nowhere else to go, nothing else to do, nothing else to become, just this, just now, just rest, and as this final awareness gently fades into stillness, you may notice everything slowly drifting away on its own, thoughts dissolving, breath softening, awareness dimming gently, as the last layer of letting go completes itself naturally, and you slip into deep, peaceful rest, beyond effort, beyond thought, beyond everything, only calm, only silence, only sleep, only calms, best. And when you wake, you may find that this feeling of ease gently stays with you, softly, quietly, throughout your day. And if this space brought you comfort tonight, you are always welcome to return. This channel will always be here, offering more moments like this, more guidance into rest, more space to soften. Whenever you need it, if you feel drawn to it, you may choose to stay connected, so you can easily find your way back to this peace again, whenever you come here to rest. But for now, there is nothing else required. Just sleep, just rest, and let everything else wait until tomorrow. Good night, and I'll gently guide you again whenever you return.